pickups can be changed, you know, put other things in it, electronics can be switched out, but if the piece of wood with the strings on it plays in a way that makes you want to play it more, then that's kind of the important thing, right? I'm realising that actually some of the specs on a guitar that people are concerned about, and myself included, like, oh, these are Scatterwan pickups, this is Seymour Duncan stuff, this is Ebony, whatever. Some of that stuff really probably doesn't make as much difference as we think, and actually there are good guitars and bad guitars at each price range, whether it's £500 or £2,500. There's going to be variation in the production, variation in the wood, variation in the setup, and variation in how that guitar and you get on together. And when you find one that works for you at whatever price you're at, maybe that's what you should be looking for. And instead of buying with our eyes and buying with, you know, a spec sheet, buying with price in mind and all that sort of stuff, maybe that's something that we should kind of consider. Like, does this guitar actually inspire me to want to pick it up?
This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
So I did a video a few days back, maybe a few weeks back at this point, about actually getting a chance to gig my Les Paul. And in the comments of that, I got a question asked where someone asked, do you still get on with your Sire Les Paul? So the Sire Lowry Colton L7. And I have to say, like, every time I play this guitar, it sort of ruins the Gibson for me. And I wanted to do a video, I didn't know exactly what to call it, but maybe the problem with cheap guitars, maybe why cheap guitars ruin everything, I don't know, I'll think of something creative, I'm sure. But this guitar really does make me question a few things, and it's something that's happened with a lot of cheap guitars. That introduction there, obviously channeling a bit of Paramore. I was using the Eric Combined 24 preset for the lead tones, and then I think the Soldano Ripper, a modified version of that for the rhythm tones, and the Glassy Plexi 24 for the clean tones. Anyway, so what... this cheap guitar thing, what am I on about? So this is a £500 guitar essentially, right? And I decided, right, let's chuck this on eBay, because I'm in this mode now of, like, you know, trying to pare back instruments. I try and do this, you know, relatively regularly so that things don't kind of overflow. Having loads and loads and loads of guitars doesn't really make too much sense for me with a 19-month-old kid. And I kind of have 3 guitars that I keep out here, and that kind of tends to be the thing. But a £500 guitar with an ebony fretboard, mahogany body, it's a gold top, so none of the kind of flame maple stuff, some nondescript Sire pickups, some OK, I presume, volume pots and that sort of stuff, made in Indonesia. One kind of thing that stands out versus something like the Gibson would be that the nut is particularly kind of boxy and not particularly well cut necessarily, and in general, like the finishing is like a tad on the sloppy side, I would say, and that's kind of been the case with Sire guitars. And in general, that's the thing, that at this end of the price continuum, I think we necessarily, temper our expectations so that finishing and stuff like that, little pits in the binding or whatever, don't really factor so much into our enjoyment of the instrument. And then what happened this week was that Sire sent me an S10, which was like a £1,300 guitar, 11 to 1300, and I kind of like, it's a way more expensive guitar, but actually when I'm playing the guitar versus their cheaper instruments, I'm feeling like, well, this kind of feels awfully similar. Like, the finishing was way better, the specs are way better. It's got Goto hardware, it's got stainless frets, it's got Seymour Duncan pickups, but actually, like, there's less of a connection that I had with that guitar versus something like this cheaper one, or like my memory of what the cheaper S7 guitars are. And it's kind of got me thinking, like, in general, like, this guitar feels just as good to play pretty much as my Gibson Les Paul. I think it sounds really decent for what it is. And the things that I don't really think that matter so much, they kind of go away when you're just playing the guitar. And the more money that I spend on the guitar, the less inclined I am to kind of look over those like little defects and those little imperfections. And frankly, I think there is a price for me that is something like £1,800, beyond which I can't really even get my head around spending, even though at this stage I could afford that sort of thing more than I ever could as a kid, or even a few years ago. It just doesn't really seem to compute very well with me. So I don't know, cheap guitars for me have kind of sort of ruined almost everything upstream, to the point where even like the K-lines, if for most people, if you're buying a new one, like £2,800, £2,900, I've bought most of mine used, and then they're like £1,700. Like, beyond that sort of money, I feel like you're buying into this kind of luxury market, which I'm not entirely sure that you always get something that's tons better. The other problem with cheap guitars that I find is that as much fun as you can have on them, for me there's also this thing kind of in the back of your head where you're thinking like, well, but this isn't the Gibson. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, well, that could be the first one to go because it's easy to get a replacement. Buy them new for like £500, sell them for maybe like £300. Like, there's no real kind of skin off anyone's teeth in that kind of circumstance. Maybe that's also not a very good way to look at it, because if I was thinking I wanted this exact guitar back, then that would be a problem, right? And a good guitar can occur at any price range, really, is what I'm starting to realise. And that, I've had expensive guitars like a PRS DGT that I had zero connection with. I've got this cheap guitar which actually each time I play it I'm enjoying it, inspired to be playing it, even though in the back of my mind it's like, well, that's an Indonesian made thing. It's perfectly decent, stays in tune, plays really well, is a lighter weight guitar than my Les Paul. It's creating a bit of a problem, right? Because it's kind of like, it doesn't look necessarily exactly the part for a Les Paul type guitar. There are aspects of it which I actually prefer to the Les Paul. This neck joint, for example, the satin neck is another example. I don't prefer the way it looks, but I think it looks okay. Actually playing it just feels fantastic. I don't know if any of you guys can relate to any of this on any level, and maybe I'm just rambling about a guitar, which is basically what's happening here, right? But that's the problem with cheap guitars for me. It's like, because they're cheap, I also don't necessarily hold them in the same esteem, but actually probably price shouldn't necessarily be as much of a factor. Is it a guitar that inspires you or not is the main factor. And if you can find a £500 guitar that can do that better than an £1,800 guitar, then surely that's the right guitar for you. It's a really weird one, and I've had some offers on it on eBay, but I'm kind of thinking about it. Maybe once it's out of the door I would never think about it again, but whilst it's still here and whilst I picked it up to play it the other day, it's definitely something that's playing on my mind. So are you someone who could make this bond with a cheap guitar, or do you think about this sort of stuff? Do you regret selling any cheaper guitars once they're gone? I'd love to know your thoughts if you have any. And likewise, if you had expensive guitars that you had literally zero feeling for, zero bond for, I can think of a Fender Custom Shop Red that I bought once, and that I had no issue selling, made no connection with it. The PRS DDT I had no connection with. This one, something is a little bit different about it. I'm not sure what.